Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays White Plume Mountain Notes series as I run my group of intrepid adventurers through White Plume Mountain, updated to 5th edition in the White Plume Mountain book, which is really cool. There's like 7 classic adventures updated to 5th edition in here, so I highly recommend it. Um, anyway, so moving forward, I've got another great video here for recapping what happened last time and viewer feedback and all that good stuff. So we'll just move right forward with that. Got a couple of notes here before we get into viewer feedback. First, I want to give a shout out to Cody and his son Seth from Sheridan, Arkansas. I saw them yesterday. I was out at doing my radio show as a remote broadcast from the Little Rock Comic Con, which was in Benton, Arkansas, even though it's a Little Rock Comic Con. But it is basically Little Rock. It's one big urban sprawl. Anyway, we had a good time, and I was sitting there getting ready to do my radio show, and Cody walked up and recognized me from these videos. So, which I thought was interesting but cool. And he was like, "Hey man, I've been watching the Out of the Abyss, and it's been really helpful." He's kind of a new DM. We had a good conversation, so I really appreciate you stopping by, Cody, and also enjoyed meeting your son Seth. They're playing together. Uh, Cody is DMing his son Seth, and they're having a great time. So I think they've done Lost Mine of Fandelver, which I should really do a video series on because that's a good adventure in its own right, in my opinion, and it's also a good introduction for DMs and players to 5th edition. I thought they did a good job with that. So anyway, Cody, Seth, thanks for stopping by. That's interesting. I work my radio show really hard, and the YouTube stuff is kind of a side thing. And it was interesting to me that somebody walked up, and I had all the gear, the headset, and I had all my remote equipment, and it was like, oh, the D&D videos. So that was pretty cool. So like I said, I continue to get good feedback on those. I asked Cody a question. I'll ask the viewers here. I really have seriously thought about doing a companion series for D&D in this video channel about uh, Q&A on D&D rules and that sort of. So like when um, when the official people at Wizards of the Coast or whatever on Twitter or social media or whatever clarify rules, I've been collecting that together to make a video series out of it. In fact, I almost did that instead of doing White Plume Mountain while we're on break from Out of the Abyss, but I went ahead and went with White Plume Mountain. But let me know if you'd like that as well. I don't know if I have the time to do it, but if people want that kind of thing, I'll try to do it. And I've got some interesting stuff collected together, and I'll probably get one out here and there anyway. But if there's interest in it, I'll try to do more of a series of that. But anyway, Cody, Seth, nice to meet you yesterday. I know it'll be a while before you see this because you said you're still working your way through Out of the Abyss and you haven't started White Plume Mountain videos yet. But hopefully you'll get to see this, and thanks for stopping by. Also, I got a gift mug from one of my players. It's a Bubba, and it's quite the mug. And they're kind of, one, it's a gift, but two, they're kind of giving me a hard time because a couple of sessions ago my energy drink got knocked over, and I had it like sitting next to me, and I don't know, some papers got moved or something like that. And I was like, "What are you knocking my drink over?" And I was just joking around, making a big deal out of it. I didn't care. And for all I knew, I knocked it over. But they were kind of giving me a hard time. They're like, "Wait, don't put your drink there. Put your drink over there." Da, da, da. So lo and behold, the next week. So Tom has said I could use his name before. I don't use my players' names in the videos unless they specifically say that I can. So thank you, Tom, for the big Bubba mug. I appreciate it. So, and if you're like me, you don't DM because you want gifts or affirmation or anything like that. But I guarantee you, your DM or GM or whatever appreciates little tokens like that every now and then. I'm not saying you got to buy your DM gifts, but just little stuff like that shows that the players see you as a person, and a friend, and not just the DM. Makes you feel good. Another thing I would kind of put if you're a player and not a DM and watching these, I would put a little bug in your ear. A lot of times when we finish our session, I think it's because people are raiding on rides or they got to get home. It's weeknight or whatever. It's like, okay, we're done, and almost everybody scatters. And one or two people will sometimes help me break stuff down, and because I like to put tables back and chairs back, and sometimes we move stuff in front of the windows to block the sun coming in, that sort of thing. A lot of times I'm over there putting all that back together because I don't want to leave the store messy. And a lot of players, it's not a negative thing. They don't think, well, I'm not going to help the DM. They're going about their life and splitting. But if your DM has a breakdown after the game, it is. I mean, I'm not like, these people are awful. I hate them for not helping me. But it's appreciated if somebody helps me kind of put everything back together. And I do have players that do that. Tom is one of them. There's others. I appreciate it. But just if you're a player or not a DM, you may, when the sessions are over, just ask the DM. Is there, can I help break down or put up or anything like that? Especially if you're at a game store, right? So I always want to make sure to leave the game store, looking nice. So anyway, and if my players are watching, which I know some of them do, I've asked them to stay several episodes behind to avoid possible spoilers. I'm not upset at all, and some of y'all do stick around to help me. I'm just making that as a note to other people. So before I get into viewer feedback, I had another thing we talked about, and another one of my players specifically said you can use my name. So his name is Gerald. He's the newer player we've had for a while uh, that joined a few months back and has been our new player. Most groups have a rookie player who I mean he's new to tabletop role playing games, not just D&D. Has a lot of video game experience like Skyrim and that sort of thing, but not tabletop D&D experience. And he's the one that was like that first time. I mean, he was all into it. Remember I was saying he was so enthusiastic. He's like 1v1 and he was going crazy and having a lot of fun. And I said, it's good to remember that enthusiasm of a new player and try not to crush that. Because they're just like, this is a whole new world for them. Anyway, we had a talk. And again, this was not negative. I think that as more experienced players, I think it's our responsibility to try to share the knowledge we have with newer players, especially if they looks like they're going to stick around. I mean, you don't want to invest everything you have in somebody who's been here 2 sessions. You don't know if they're going to stick around or not. But Gerald, who plays a basically Oriental Adventurers fighter named Uzumaki, I think I got the name right. If I got that name wrong, I apologize, Gerald, when you get around to watching this. That uh, uh, I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, we were talking about metagaming, and I didn't want this is not negative. It's not about jumping on people. I just think it's important to kind of shepherd your newer players, and we had a discussion at the beginning of this last session about metagaming, and in my opinion, metagaming is a normal, natural thing to do until somebody points out to you it may not be the best thing to do at a tabletop RPG session because it can spoil your spontaneous surprise and enjoyment of the game, and it can also possibly affect the group. So, but it makes total sense if you have knowledge of the game or whatever to just play that way. So the reason I brought it up is because of Blackrazor at the end of last session. It was his character that picked up Blackrazor and was like, I have the Master Sword. And then all of a sudden Blackrazor was, like, well, I don't know if I'm gonna let you use me or not. You're gonna feed me souls. And we had the big discussion about Blackrazor's attitude and personality. And you could tell he was kind of disappointed. So at the beginning of this past session, I said, okay, let's talk about Blackrazor. I said, what did you expect to happen when you picked up Blackrazor? And he basically said amazing things because this is some big legendary sword. And I said, okay, did you expect that because of the lore of the game that you had been told about the sword by other people saying Blackrazor, like they were at the Yawning Portal Inn and people were talking about Blackrazor and all this stuff in White Plume Mountain. He said some, and I said, but was it also because if you've seen previous videos, his cousin, just due to sheer enthusiasm over the game, kind of spoiled some of White Plume Mountain for him. Just, White Plume Mountain, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, yeah, some of it too is because my cousin told me all about this sword. And I said, okay, so that's metagaming. And I said, it can be hard to do to separate your personal real life knowledge from your character's knowledge. But it's important to try to do that. So I said, you were expecting Blackrazor to do all this stuff, but your character only knows that Blackrazor is a powerful sword of legend. You don't know all this other stuff. So we kind of talked about, and he's like, okay, I get that. I see your point. And then, we're talking about metagaming in general around the table. Again, this was not punitive. It was not to jump on Gerald or anything like that. It was just, maybe nobody's ever explained metagaming to Gerald. And there are unwritten rules and etiquette, because I don't think maybe the DMG or the player's handbook talks about metagaming, but I don't remember that off the top of my head. It's just one of those things in the gaming culture. So, and there may be some tables where the DM and the players allow metagaming. Go for it. My table, I try to minimize it. And in fact, with White Plume Mountain, I've really focused in on metagaming because it's such a well-known module, and Blackrazor and Whelm and Wave, the major weapons, are well-known. So I'm really trying to keep the metagaming down for those people who don't know what's going to happen, so they can be sublime, surprised, and enjoy it. So anyway, so we had a good discussion on that. And one of the examples I pointed out was I have another player who's now quite experienced and quite good at D&D. We were playing Lost Mine of Phandelver. Now, he doesn't remember this. I pointed it out to him, and he's like, oh, I don't remember that. But when we were first doing Lost Mine of Phandelver, it came about that he was reading the adventure as well, because I guess he had the starter kit. And I said, oh, no, don't do that, because he's like a brand new player. And he goes, but I don't want to miss anything. So he wanted to read because he wanted to make sure that he got everything out of the adventure. And so, like I said, it's just natural as, to metagame, really. So we just kind of had a good discussion on that. And he's like, man, I don't remember that. And he goes, maybe I was reading it to take another group of people through it. And, maybe I'm misremembering, but I'm pretty sure I was like, oh, no, don't read ahead. Don't read maybe read after we finish something if you want to read and see how it all worked and what I did and didn't do by the book. I said, but try not, don't read ahead. Don't spoil anything. So anyway, and then later, a veteran player, very veteran player, uh, metagamed, and I pointed out an example, not to beat up on them, but again, to talk about metagaming, where we were in a fight. They were fighting some knights that we'll talk about later that had plate mail armor on, and he's rolling dice and people are rolling attack rolls, and he's like, nope, that's not going to hit because that's plate mail and that's this armor class. So I pointed that out. I said that's a mild example of metagaming, because you don't know, that could be magic armor, or the stats could, maybe they have bad dexterity, or you don't know. You don't definitely know. So, but again, it's the natural thing to do. You've been playing D&D for 20 years or whatever, and you know that plate mail is this armor class. So it's just really easy to metagame. But I try to, and I can't control what goes on in people's heads. I don't want to control that. That's not my job or my responsibility, and I have no authority to mess around what goes on in people's heads. But what is expressed at the gaming table, we can try to have control over. So I just thought that was kind of interesting to talk about metagaming. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on metagaming. And, do you have problems with it at your table? Do you allow it? Do you find yourself struggling with it? Because again, I think it can be really, really easy to metagame, right? I mean, it's just natural. So anyway, all right, time for viewer feedback. I'm going to put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback, and let's see what we have to go with. Okay, so first of all, Sonic Halo wrote in. Sonic Halo had an interesting take, because one of the things that we're working with is like Blackrazor and Wave and Whelm, the magic weapons, are very powerful. In my opinion, they should be artifacts, not legendary weapons. They're very powerful, especially Blackrazor. And, I'm doing this sort of balance between allowing the player to try to have a chance to use Blackrazor, but also having a lot of role playing we'll get into here in a moment. But, it's a challenge. Do you want to, and my players are 6th level going through White Plume Mountain when the adventure is written for 8th level or more, but they're buzzing through it. I thought they would, because they were really buzzing through Out of the Abyss, even at 5th and 6th level and all that. So so far they've been doing pretty well. There's still deadly encounters that could possibly wipe them out, but we'll see. I hope not. I don't play against the players. I play with the players. If they do something stupid, or if they do something that just by the book is deadly, I'll allow it to be deadly. But anyway, so Sonic Halo said the explanation in game could be that the weapons have been sealed away for so long that the magic needs to be reawakened to full power. I like that. I kind of wish I would have thought of that, because I've already said, that Blackrazor is, basically being a big jerk about it, and you have to earn me. But maybe that could be Blackrazor's ego compensating for the fact that he needs to be reawakened to full power. I don't know how I'm going to play that yet, but I like that idea, Sonic Halo. Um, let's see. Sonic Halo goes says enjoying the series. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I do appreciate all the feedback. Now he also had a point. We were talking about the gods that you worship in D&D or serve, and Sonic Halo pointed out that in D&D, I don't think that in the vast majority of campaigns it is possible to be actually atheist. Your player, not you as a person. I'm a Christian. I mention that sometimes, but if there's people out there that are atheist, I mean that's personal. You know, you can be. But we're talking about your character, not you as a person. All right. The gods are real in D&D and have physical forms and tangible effects and powers. Clerics and paladins have the actual benefits of serving their deities. You can plane shift and find their realms and castles. You could choose to not follow any of them, but to deny they exist as a character in the D&D world would just be a weird decision. I kind of am landing with Sonic Halo's perspective on this. I think that in a typical D&D world like the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or Dragonlance or any of those, um, your traditional Tolkienish kind of D&D fantasy worlds, I think it would be very difficult for your character to be an outright atheist because there's so much evidence and just ingrained in normal day-to-day life of the deity's interactions with the mortal world, if you will. So maybe you could be like, I'm not going to serve them, but to just outright disbelieve, I think would almost have to be a personality quirk, or you'd had some kind of head games ran on you or something like that. But I think I agree with Sonic Halo here. Like to hear your thoughts on that as well. How hard would it be in a traditional, like let's say the Forgotten Realms, for a character to be an outright atheist? Like there's no gods. What would that? How hard would that actually be, role playing wise? Um, and then we also talked about there was a little bit of one of my players was confused last week because we had surprise. There was a surprise round, and they were like, oh, you get advantage if you surprise somebody. And I was like, no, not by the rules. And Sonic Halo points out that there is a rogue class archetype feature, Assassinate, that allows you to have advantage when you surprise people. So on a personal note, Sonic Halo it normally doesn't run um, prepared adventures, like official adventures, whatever, but is getting into it uh, with Against the Giants and making some changes and that sort of thing. So good luck with that, Sonic Halo. Thanks for your notes. Really enjoy your comments. And it's interesting what you're doing with the Drow and the Dark Knights and all that in Against the Giants and customizing it for your own needs. Thank you so much for the comments. Wheeled Adventure says, we've taken a bit of a break from White Plume Mountain while someone else is running Tome of Horrors. So I haven't progressed since last time, but it's good to hear my take on the boss fight before I run it. He's talking about Quesnith, the Oni who protects Blackrazor. And Will, you're welcome. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the feedback. So Rob Plummer uh, wrote in he's going to he fully intends to put Blackrazor in the hands of the Oni when his group goes through there. He's got 6 to 7 players at seventh level, and he's saying they'll gang up on the Oni and pummel it otherwise. That's true. Um, I mean, my characters sort of struggled, but for the most part took him out. Yeah, as we've discussed before, when characters reach that 5th through 7th level threshold, they become quickly overpowered for the same CR rating monsters, especially when they have so many party members. Just his take on it. Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In retrospect, I could have done that. I didn't, but because I had he got some anyway. The fight didn't go as well as I could have, but that cone of cold did do some serious damage. Um, and I have no problem with somebody giving Oni the Blackrazor because one, that's yet that more element they're earning Blackrazor from the wielder of Blackrazor and all of that stuff. I just personally didn't go that direction. I thought that the Oni was going to be a little bit more dangerous than that. Again, my players are 6th level. Rob's players are 7th level. So um, anyway, but yeah, there's probably a lot of people that will do that, and I think it's a good way to go with it. All right. So next from Rob Plummer. He also said, and following up on the discussion where I said the way that I do spell components is to basically make it fungible with your party wealth, um, unless there's a special circumstance going on. Just, if you cast a spell, that spell's component's worth X gold or whatever, just subtract that out of your wealth. Um, unless there's a special circumstance going on. That's just how I handle it, so that you don't have to track every little thing. Now, there's some players that want to track every little thing, and if they want to do that, let them. I've got a player who's like way serious on encumbrance, and if that increases their enjoyment of the game, let them. I don't enforce it. Now, if they come to me and say, "Hey, can I?" And they're asking me about an encumbrance, and they bring a rule to my attention, um, then I'll probably go, "Well, yeah, you can't. That's too much encumbrance for you to have." But I don't go seeking that stuff out unless there's a special story element going on that it needs to um, be focused on. One of the examples I've used more than once, I don't track ammunition. I don't make my characters track ammunition unless there's a special like say they're in an extended fight scene, like they're on the run and shooting and stuff like that, and it becomes a story element. I'm about to run out of ammunition. Am I going to run out of ammunition? Then we'll start tracking ammunition. But if it's just general everyday play, I'm assuming they're retrieving their stuff after battles and and everything's fine. Um, okay, but anyway, yeah. So I make uh, consumable spell components fungible with wealth. It's just the interchange. But there could be, like we talked about. Rob says resurrection may be the only one I would be specific on. And this brings up a good point. I said there will be a few instances where it won't be fungible, the fungible house rule, depending on the situation. If there's a good story reason, then I'm going to focus in on the spell component. Also, I said personally for resurrection, I don't think that it should ever just be casting a spell. There should be some gravitas, some narration, some role playing uh, with an adventure or quest involved. And this is assuming it's a party member or a very important NPC. If it's just a random NPC or something like that, you could just cast Resurrection and be done with it. But if it's one of the party members or somebody real important that the party members know, that could be different. Um, so Dawn, I think you've commented before, and I tried to pronounce your name. If I mispronounce it again, I apologize. Dawn, it's either room or Rome, or Rome even possibly. Anyway, I hope I got that right on one of those 3 attempts. Um, Says I'm loving this walkthrough. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Without even realizing it, I put a dagger in my game that is similar to Blackrazor. You have given me some good role-playing ideas I can use for my story. Thank you. Cool. Have fun with it. Role-play with it. Don't just make it a video game weapon. Yeah, role-play with it. And I'm really glad that this series is helping you with that. That's what they're for. I enjoy doing them, but I also like helping people. Okay, so here is an important discussion to follow up from last video. D1 Morto said it seems like you don't want them to have the sword because it's too powerful. Talking about Blackrazor. I think it would work better if you let them have power but balanced it with negatives. For example, you could bring back the ego stuff from first edition you were talking about. Egos where the sword or the weapon can actually take you over. On Critical Role, talk about the web series Critical Role, where they do Dungeons and Dragons with Matt Mercer and all them, Grog gets a sword called Craven Edge. Much like Blackrazor, it craves souls. If it doesn't get souls, it tries to take control of its wielder to force them to kill for it. Plus, it has cursed functionality that grants more and more strength, but eventually kills its wielder. As it is, there exists an extremely powerful item which they are being prevented from using. Let them have their fun, but make them pay the piper. So, if you want a discussion on the actual statistics and everything, and what exactly I'm doing with Blackrazor, I recommend watching the previous video to this one because I went into it at length. But to summarize, Blackrazor is very powerful. Very powerful. It's +3/+3. It can put haste on you. When you kill somebody with it, you get that person's hit points as additional temporary hit points for 24 hours. It can sense the presence of creatures within so many feet. I mean, it's very powerful. But it also wants souls, and if it doesn't get fed souls every 3 days, it will turn on its wielder. It's very intelligent. It's imperious. It speaks with a big booming voice, and it wants souls. It doesn't care whose souls. It'll eat your soul if you're the wielder. It doesn't care. It just wants souls. It wants to it wants to bring about the heat death of the universe, basically. So, and I said, but this is a 6th level character who now has Blackrazor, and there's some game balance issues that I'm trying to balance out, if you will. Pardon the pun, intentional. I love puns. With interesting role playing. So to address this last thing, he says, D1 Mordo says there exists an extremely powerful item which they are being prevented from using. I disagree with that only because I know that I intend to allow them to use the sword if they invest in the sword. They're just not going to get instant gratification with it. They're not going to pick it up and and it's everything Blackrazor can be. If they were like 10th level characters or something like that, it might be different. But you do have to have some game balance going on here. And remember, the way this White Plume Mountain was originally written, your quest was to retrieve the weapons, but then you were supposed to give them back to the people that hired you for the quest. So even in the original adventure, you were supposed to get your heart's desire, whatever that means. So even in the original adventure, it wasn't necessarily intended that you keep these weapons because they're so powerful. Of course, throughout the 40 years or whatever, almost 40 years since this adventure has get out, more often than not, I'm sure the characters kept the weapons. Let's be honest. But anyway, so I'm trying to strike a nice balance between, uh, you know, not upsetting the complete balance of the game, allowing them to use the swords or the other weapons that are in White Plume Mountain, but also have very interesting role playing. So they're not being prevented, they just got to work at it. Prevented would mean, and I understand what you're saying, like they have the sword but they can't use it right at this moment, that there is a preventing that's happening right there, but it's not meant, it can be overcome. So, and in fact, in this very session, they start getting hints that it can be overcome and that sort of thing. And that was another reason why I had the metagaming discussion with the player, was to encourage them that, just let the game unfold and don't expect everything to be instant like that. But, going back to Sonic Halo said, I do like the idea also that they've been sealed away for so long, the magic needs to be reawakened. I think that's really cool. I may make that, if not Blackrazor, maybe some of the other weapons. I may make it part of Blackrazor. He's talking big. Well, you have to earn me, but really he's like, whoa, I'm not what I was. What's going on here? So we'll see. I don't even know which way I'm going to go with that. I like it though. So I talked about game balance and the attunement process, and also, oh, by the way, it's a chaotic good character wanting to wield a chaotic neutral sword. And the player actually asked me last session, it's like, is it possible to change alignment? And I said yes. So, I said you have to do it through role playing. You can't just throw a switch and be a different alignment. But I said it's possible. That's how I approach it. Maybe other DMs would just say flip a switch or a different alignment. So I said if the player goes the distance with the attunement process, and like I said, it's a continuing attunement process where as he kills soul or eats souls, lets Blackrazor eat souls, it keeps attuning more and more abilities unlock out of Blackrazor. So if the player goes the distance with the attunement process and doesn't mind having a chaotic neutral sword that eats souls indiscriminately as a chaotic good character, he's welcome to it. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I mean that real. He's like, for real. If he wants to go through all that. They're not prevented from using it. They're just not getting instant gratification and going from 0 to 60 in one round of holding its pommel. That's my take on it. Okay. So D1 Mordo came back and said, as far as game balance, aren't you just delaying the inevitable? If they're going to get the full power eventually, then at that point it will be unbalanced. So really, it's just a role-playing choice for the sword, isn't it? And he goes on to say, I defer to your judgment, but he's keying off a couple of things. I said, one, that the player said the treasure sucked, and two, the group debated throwing the sword into lava. So, uh, okay, so yeah, the player did say this treasure sucks. That's because this player is used to the instant gratification of a video game. Okay, it's everybody else is loving it, right? Loving the role play and everything that's going on. But this guy was like, man, yeah, this is fun, but that treasure kind of sucked because of what his cousin had told him and because of what he was expecting, he thought he was going to pick up the sword, and it just didn't work that way. So there's ways around metagaming. So I'm trying to, knowing metagaming exists. I mean, anybody can go read the DM Dungeon Master's Guide and look at the stats as written for Blackrazor. And we could change those stats. I haven't, but so that's just kind of. I'm gonna put away. He's like, man, the treasure sucked. And yeah, the group did debate throwing the sword into lava because it's a chaotic neutral sword that just wants to eat souls and is very powerful. And it's even said, I don't care if I eat your soul if you're wielding me. I just want souls. Um, and then, yeah, hold on a second. He says, wondering if delaying this power unlock is increasing the fun of the game. I think at the very end of that one session, it was not increasing the fun of the game. But this past session, I think it was increasing the fun of the game because we had some fun moments with Blackrazor. So all the points that you raise, D1 Morto, are valid as far as initially thinking, are you doing this correctly? But I think only the proof is in the pudding and the tasting thereof. We'll have to let it unfold and see if I'm handling it the right way or not. And you never know as a DM. It could turn out they're like, we loved everything about that except how you handle Blackrazor. But that's the way I'm going with it. By the way, I appreciate D1 Mordo's comments. If anyone ever, it's like, hey, Shane, why are you doing it that way? Or I don't mind being challenged. It helps me think through stuff. So, and he was talking about Blackrazor being role played as a jerk. And there's more to this discussion. I encourage you to go read the comments on video 5. I'm kind of summarizing here, but we're talking about the thing with being a jerk, and I said the thing with Blackrazor is the sword really is kind of a jerk, or a bastard, no pun intended. Now I don't usually use profanity in my stuff, but there's actually bastard swords. Okay, so that was just a little play on that. So there's no pun. Well, there's pun very much intended, I guess, on that. It's a chaotic neutral intellect that only cares about eating souls, even its own wielders, and wants to bring about the end of everything. It has a deep, echoing voice and speaks in an imperious tone and expects to be obeyed. So, I mean, unless you happen to be a chaotic neutral nihilist that likes to be bossed around, I think that you will think that Blackrazor is a jerk. That's just me personally. So, anyway, and the other thing on game balance, it could take a while the Blackrazor to fully unlock. So it could be level 7 or 8 or even higher before Blackrazor fully unlocks for this character or another character if they stick with it. So, uh, that being the case, it may not be the game balance issue once it fully unlocks if it sticks with it. So, and then finally, um, D1 Mordo said you could argue that overpowering them, talking about the players, would be a net decrease in fun since they wouldn't be challenged. I said this is a very important point. The player of Blackrazor, if Blackrazor was fully unlocked immediately, would have more fun. But then it would turn into player whoever and their amazing friends for a few level, and that would not be fun for everybody. So it's not just that player; it's the game balance, the group balance as a whole that I'm focusing on with my approach to Blackrazor. But again, D1 Mordo, I totally appreciate your comments. And then I think finally, Ethan D said, quick question. You mentioned that the Oni fumbled on a surprise round, and that meant that the entire round of combat was wasted for him. Did he roll a 1 on both of his attacks? Because if not, I don't think that rolling a 1 on one part of a multi-attack means that the monster doesn't get to take the second attack, which was it sounded like to me you were getting at. If this is what you're playing it, if this is the way you're playing it, is that a 5e rule I didn't know about, or is it a house rule at your table? He says, I'm really enjoying watching the series, part of my prep to run players through White Plume Mountain. It's very insightful. I stream a homebrew game weekly with my friends, and we just hit a good narrative stopping point, so we're going to take a break from story and do a non-canonical run through this adventure starting this Monday. It should be non-canonical. He's saying, we're going to run at it, but it's not going to be part of the main story, so maybe I guess if you die or get Blackrazor or something, it doesn't impact the main campaign they're on, I'm assuming. I just keyed in that you said you stream a homebrew game weekly, Ethan. So let me know. I'll go watch it. I want to go check it out. I missed that when you first commented. So tell me your stream, or I guess let me go check. I could probably, go look at your YouTube channel here real quick and see what you're doing. See if I'm understanding this right. Let's look. Well, I don't see. Is it the Anti-Heroes Anonymous D&D show? I see like episode 39, episode 40. That must be what you're talking about. So people go check out Ethan D, ETHAN space D. He's streaming some D&D. I'm going to check it out. Why don't you check it out too, and we can let Ethan know, our comments on his stuff. So Ethan, yes, fumbling at my table is a house rule that if you're multi-attacking and you fumble, you don't get any further multi-attacks. Because, I rule fumbles or like you've dropped your weapon or the string on your crossbow. Something negative has happened weapon-wise. Now, sometimes for narrative stuff, I'll make it something different. But usually it just means you dropped your sword or you accidentally flung your battle axe or something like that. If you roll a 1 on an attack. If you roll a 1 on a spell attack, it's a fizzle, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, and I have that for the players. If you fumble, if you have 3 attacks and you fumble on the second one, you don't get that third one. If you fumble on the first one, you don't get any of them. And to be fair, I treat monsters the same way. It's just a house rule. You obviously, and I should have clarified that. I'm just so used to doing it that way. I didn't even think of clarifying that. But what he's talking about is Quesnif the Oni, who's the defender, the guardian of Blackrazor, got a surprise round on my players. I was like, and he fumbled. And I was like, ugh. So that's what he's referring to. So anyway, thanks everyone for your viewer feedback. I really appreciate your viewer feedback. So keep it up, and I will always do my best to answer your questions and clarify things. So I'll take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback, and we'll get on to what actually happened in the most recent session. All right, so when we last left our intrepid heroes / adventurers / mercenaries / murder hobos, they were in room 23 of White Plume Mountain, which is this very odd room that has literally a floating stream that's floating 2 feet above the floor and rushing along and entering through a tunnel and exiting through a tunnel, so sort of curving through the room. And then there's 6 kayaks that can hold 2 people each in this room, and that's where we ended. So, just to talk about that a little bit, gave a few initial notes on Area 23. One of the things to keep in mind is this water, I DM'd and ruled that it's rushing pretty strong because it talks about a very strong person, unless they make their saving throw, can be, knocked over or swept along or whatever by the stream. So it's not just like kind of burbling along, it's kind of rushing along. And then of course you have the kayaks, which they're kayaks. There's nothing magical or odd, but they're just kayaks. They're obviously meant to put in the stream and go down the stream. So what my players did, kind of contemplating on this one, they cast water breathing on everybody, which I thought was pretty smart. That didn't even occur to me. And then there was some discussion that should they just jump with water breathing, should they just jump in the stream and swim, or should they use the kayaks? I even told them, I was like, I'm not telling them what to do. I was like, but wow, what a cool kind of visual or whatever, I'm just jumping in and swimming here with water breathing. By the way, if I remember right, water breathing lasts 24 hours. So, and it basically just allows you to breathe underwater like you're breathing normally. Um, they decided on using the kayaks. So, and I've gotten a little fancier. I've typed up my notes here. I usually just do a little index card, but I took the index card and typed up notes. So hopefully, because I'm always like, did I miss anything? So hopefully I won't miss anything this time. Um, so they decided to get in the kayaks and go. Now, before they did that, uh, they cast Detect Magic. They checked out the kayaks for traps and stuff like that. They cast Detect Magic on the kayaks, but of course, it's Detect Magic is kind of a radius spell, if I remember it correctly. So I had the stream glow very brightly because it's magical. The kayaks did not glow. And the characters that had some sort of arcane proficiency or whatever, I said, that this stream this is like heavy duty, like legendary magic. This isn't just I'm going to cast a spell or something like this. This is like a permanent, very strong magical effect that is beyond your abilities or probably the abilities of anybody that taught you magic. This is kind of a legendary thing. That's not in the book. I just ad-libbed that, and I had it glow very brightly. So, kind of trying to reinforce the crazy nature of White Plume Mountain in general, that this wizard created it. There's nothing natural, kind of about it. Um, so there was some discussion on should we go down the stream or not. One player actually, the guy who has Blackrazor actually said, I don't want to go down the stream. I don't, why should we? Um, and, everybody else was like, no, let's go. And ironically, this is a part of the dungeon you can completely bypass and you don't miss anything. You miss a fight. Really, that's it. And some XP and maybe some loot. But you don't miss anything central to working your way towards the objectives of the dungeon, which is to recover the 3 weapons. Now, most maps, and I'll try to find examples of this, they will connect Area 23 and Area 26. 26 is the inverted ziggurat, the terraced aquarium where Blackrazor is. There's a little tunnel that goes straight north to Area 23. So you can go either way. If you go south, you go towards Blackrazor. If you go north, you go towards this crazy floating stream area. I've seen at least one map that has it so that you can't go immediately south to Blackrazor. You have to. They removed a section of tunnel, and there's some secret rooms and stuff that they made it. You have to go through the floating stream and all that before you can go down to Blackrazor. Personally, I think if you're going to have the floating stream area with Sir Bluto and his knights and all that, I think you should have to go through it because it's a tough fight and it's yet another thing to earn Blackrazor. Because Blackrazor itself, if you go straight to the Terraced Aquarium and you find a good way to get past all the monsters and stuff in the Terraced Aquarium, it's really not super incredibly challenging to get Blackrazor from Quesnel the Oni. So I kind of like, I'll try to show 2 examples. One where you can go straight to Blackrazor, another one where you kind of have to work your way through the floating stream and all that. I kind of lean more towards you got to do the floating stream. So just because the difficulty and the weird, it's just why miss it? That's such a cool, weird thing to have in a dungeon. So anyway, the party took a vote and they decided to go down. Now, the book says it's kind of difficult to get into the kayaks and all that. I mean, obviously you could do it, but there's like you got to get people in the kayaks, you got to get them, and it's kind of a. Let's see if I can find exactly what the book says. Let's see, Area 23. Yeah, this is on page 104 and 105. It says they'll have to figure out how to get into the kayaks once the kayaks are placed on the stream, the surface of which is 5 feet off the floor. These kayaks tip over easily. And then it says if they board the kayaks, characters will bump along through a twisting tunnel 6 feet across. They can regulate their speed by pushing against the walls. Eventually, they will emerge into Area 24, which is where Sir Bluto and his knights are waiting. I didn't see any point, personally, to making the kayaks difficult to get on. Because really, the whole point of the kayaks is to get you down the stream so that you can encounter the craziness of Sir Bluto and his knights. That, to me, seems the real challenge, not getting into the kayaks. So, yeah, technically, be like, how do we get these kayaks on the stream, and how do we get in? You could do that if you want. But, I'm not wanting to spend an amazing amount of time in White Plume Mountain. We're already 6 sessions in. Now, the first session was complete role playing, getting set up. So they've had 5 sessions in the mountain, and they're basically done with 1/3 of it. So they've got, another roughly 10 weeks to go. So, three something months in White Plume Mountain. I'm just, guessing. And remember, this is just a break between Out of the Abyss Part 1 and Part 2. But anyway, I just said you can get them kayaks and go. I didn't make a big hairy deal out of it. Now, before they got in the kayaks, the wizard used Barnaby, her owl familiar, to send Barnaby down the tunnel. And I fudged this a little bit because I think that for Area 24 to truly be effective, there has to be a little bit of a surprise element. At least I wanted there to be that surprise element of like, whoa! And that's Sir Bluto and his knights waiting in ambush with nets to throw nets over and pull people out of the stream and onto the floor and then have their way with them. Sir Bluto in Area 24 is an evil champion with evil knights working for him. And it's a pretty tough fight. But the surprise element makes it even tougher. So the way this works is you're in this Area 23 room, and I'll show the map or whatever. But there's a circular tunnel that cuts through Area 23, cuts through a lot of the mountain, then it goes through Area 24, and then it cuts through some more mountain and comes back through Area 23. So it's a big circle. Now, when you get in the kayaks, it's flowing west to east, if I remember right. Yeah, depending on, I think when you're in Area 23, it's flowing, let's see. Yeah, it flows out of the northeast, and it flows, it flows in from the west and goes out through the northeast. So it's kind of flowing like that. So if you go down the tunnel where it's flowing out of the room, it's quite a long stretch before it comes back into room 24, which is where Sir Bluto and them at. So they sent Barnaby the owl familiar flying down the tunnel because there's a little bit of room above the water. I think it's about 3 feet above the water. And I said, how far down do you want to go? And the wizard said, well, the connection is 100 feet. I said, well, you hit 100 feet and you're still in a tunnel. And so she brought Barnaby back and said, okay, now go up the other one. Now, by the map, it looks like it's much less than 100 feet to get to Area 24 and see Sir Bluto and his knights. I basically fudged it and said, yeah, you go 100 feet again and you're at the extent of your range. There's times as a DM where you'll do that, because I really wanted that surprise. We're throwing nets and all. I thought that would be a good fight and an interesting challenge for the players. I equally could have said, okay, Barnaby flies up the other tunnel, and whoa, there's like this room with a bunch of people in plate mail, and the stream flows through there too, and then the players could have gotten ready for that or whatever, but I didn't. I just chose not to. And it was interesting because Gerald, the new player, or newer player, he's been with us for a few months now, said, do you ever just change things to the game based on what we've said? And I was like, I'm thinking to myself, I'm doing that right now. But I said sometimes. I said it just depends. I want to make sure to tell an interesting story. So sometimes, yeah, I'll adjust. Sometimes I'll just do it completely by the book. But I thought that was ironic. He asked that right then. So anyway, they finally, what they decided to do was get in the kayaks to go and fly Barnaby ahead of them to try to get some, advance warning if anything was going on. So what I ruled, and I had to come up with a lot of this on the spot, it doesn't specifically say it in the book, was that I ruled that the stream is running at 50 feet per round. If you were in an initiative round or a combat round, that stream is moving along at 50 feet, which I thought was fair enough because it said it's flowing enough to knock somebody over. They really got to make a strength saving throw or what, a strength check to not get knocked over if they're trying to go through the stream, walk through it or whatever. Because remember, it's suspended 2 feet above the floor, and then it's 3 feet of rushing water. The owl flies at 60 feet per second, if I remember right. So I basically ruled that the owl was getting just a little further ahead as they went, just slightly outdistancing them. So, and they were also using 10-foot poles to kind of try to, maneuver themselves down the tunnel, but really the tunnel just takes them. And I said that if any of you are proficient in nature or survival, and I think we have one dwarf player, so if you're a dwarf, you realize that you're going in sort of a circular um, direct. This tunnel seems to be roughly kind of circular, and kind of describe that. Uh, and they were kind of using these poles, and they were asking, can we completely stop if we need to? And I think in my head, I said you wouldn't know until you tried, but I think in my head I said if both players with 10-foot poles, because they've got a lot of 10-foot poles, they got like 7 or something. They've already gone through like 3 of them, getting past traps and stuff. But um, if both people in the kayak do like a DC 15 strength or better and press against the walls, they could stop themselves. But then you might have a kayak behind you slamming into you. Um, so that's kind of how I ruled that. So, and keep in mind that because this is going to come into play again, where I'm saying that the water is moving the kayaks along at 50 feet per round. Again, that's not in the book. That's just something I came up with, but it came into play, very quickly. Um, so, what I did allow was the owl flying ahead. I didn't want to completely disallow the familiar being helpful. What I was trying to prevent was the familiar completely spoiling the whole room and the trap, uh, and giving the players an incredibly crazy advantage. I still could have gone that way. It wouldn't have been that awful. But like I said, I just wanted whoa, what's going on here? So I allowed the owl kind of bullets out of the tunnel and I said they sees figures in chainmail, and all of a sudden some kind of crazy happens, and then the owl's on the floor flopping around. And the wizard's like, oh, and what's actually happened is because there's Sir Bluto kind of overseeing things, and there's 4 knights, 2 on either side of the stream, and they have nets that they're trying to, as people come through, they're trying to cast nets over and pull them out off the floor so they can, kill them or whatever. And the book specifically says that they will be aware something is going on because they see disturbances in the water, so they know that the kayaks are being used. So they're ready, they're waiting. Now, a couple of things to mention here. One, I think that if they would have water breathed and just swam, I think I would have allowed them to catch the knights by surprise, because there would have been a minor disturbance as they jumped in the water, but it wouldn't have been a continual disturbance of the kayak on top of the water. So I think that I would have, and plus too, it's like, whoa, I'm ready to throw a net on a kayak, but dude, there's people bulleting out in the water. So it'd have been harder to get them with a net or whatever. So gameplay wise, they should have done that water breathing thing. I think that would have been really neat, but they didn't. So what I allowed to have happen was, I think the wizard was in the second kayak, and through the visual realized something was going on and yelled enemy or ambush, yelled out enough so that the players realized something was going on. And what this allowed was for them to not be surprised, and allowed them to kind of react on that first round instead of getting a surprise round on them. So that, that having Barnaby, the familiar owl, scoping things out up ahead did help, but they still got that, oh wait, crazy ambush thing going on. Um, so at this point, we've got uh, 4 knights that are in the monster manual, 2 on either side of the stream, and I just ruled they had 1 net each group. I didn't rule that each knight had a net. So there's 2 net attacks going to happen. Now, by the book, there's 8 knights and Sir Bluto, and I think that would have been a deadly encounter for at least 1, if not 2, of my players. I was like, man, what do I was using, what is it, Cobalt Attack, I think that's the name of the website, something like that, where you can enter, how many players you have at what level, and then CR monsters. Monsters a certain CR, and it'll compare and tell you is this an easy, average, deadly encounter kind of thing. And I was fiddling around with that, and I finally landed on 4 knights because also we had a one-time extra player. There's an existing player who, before they had to move, and he's the brother of one of our main players, played with us quite consistently, had to move, and every now and then they'll visit, and when they do, we work them in because they're, a member of the group. So I knew they were coming too. So I was like, do I want 2 knights or 4 knights? And since they were coming, I went ahead and I said, well, they're going to have one extra person, so I'll give them 4 knights. And I'm glad that person came because we had another player missing. So I helped equal things out. But we had 4 knights, and this fight is tough. In fact, one of my players said, boy, this was tougher than the Oni for Blackrazor. And I totally agree with that. When I was reading the encounter in the White Plume Mountain book, in Tales from the Yawning Portal and the White Plume Mountain Adventure, and then I was looking at the stats of the champion, who's Sir Bluto, and the knights and all, I was like, man, this is going to be a tough fight. So I think that Bluto is a CR9 champion, if I'm not mistaken, and then all the knights are CR3. And the knight, I really recommend that you read the abilities for Sir Bluto and also the knights, because Sir Bluto has he's really tough with his sword, and he's got Indomitable where he can re-roll saving throws a couple times a day, and other stuff like that. And then the knights have these abilities where they can shout words at each other that will give them bonuses, bonus dice, and stuff like that. And it's just, it can be a tough fight, is what I'm saying. I totally recommend that you research Sir Bluto and you research the knights before you do the fight, because it can be quite difficult for the players. If I would have done all 8 knights, I'm pretty sure one, if not more, of the players would have died. As a matter of fact, one player went down in one round. Sir Bluto just walked over and was like, bam, 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 dropped him. And then was going after somebody else to drop them. I mean, they were all like, whoa, they were really scared of Sir Bluto. Really scared. So, anyway, so one thing I want to point out, this is something that I did. This is not by the book. It's not even really by the rules of D&D that I know of. It's something I did. So I'm like, I've got 4 kayaks with 2 players each. I think 2 players in all of them. I think one kayak had 1 player, if I remember right. I'd have to look. Maybe all 4. There's a picture I took of the drawn out map and everything. That'll answer that here in a second. But anyway, so I got 4 kayaks, roughly 10 feet apart, coming in. I got them in a moving stream, and I've got to roll initiative and keep up with movement. And in some cases, somebody in a kayak 2 kayaks behind is going to go in initiative before somebody in a kayak up front. So it was a really weird, and since there's this ambush thing going on, I've got a couple of players that have exited the tunnel, the nets are starting to go, and then I've got people still in the tunnel in their kayaks. So I did this really weird timing with initiative and movement and held actions. If somebody was in the kayak, like the 4th kayak back, they're like, well, I'm just going to hold my action until I exit, and I'm like, okay. And then I'm telling them on your round, you're moving 50 feet because you're in this kayak. So I allowed them to take their movement or their attack or whatever sometime during that 50 feet because they're just being swept along. So it was this really, and it worked, which I'm glad because I just did it on the spur of the moment. But just keep in mind that there could be some weird timing issues, and we solved it through, like I said, anywhere in that 50 feet that it's moving you, you can do your attack and your movement or whatever. And you can hold your action until you come out, and all that. So if somebody was all the way back and they hear craziness going on up there, they didn't just waste their round going, well, I just have to wait because I can't do anything back here. So there was stuff like that going on. Again, that was totally optional. That's how I did it, to try to maximize player involvement on the first round of initiative. You don't have to do it that way, but it's just how I did it. And it was pretty fun. We had fun with it. I also ruled, again, this isn't in the book. This isn't, I don't even think by the rules, was as you're zipping through the room on your first round in that 50 feet, anytime in there you can jump out or take an action or whatever, and anywhere in that 50 feet. If you want to jump out of your kayak and not take an action, just jump out and be out and ready for the next round, then you could just do that. I didn't, I'm sure that should normally take like an acrobatics or athletics check or something like that, but I didn't rule that. I just said you could just jump out. Now, if they wanted to get out of the kayak and also take an action, like an attack or a spell or whatever else will qualify for an action, then they must make an athletics. And I made it athletics because this seemed more dexterity based to me. Then they must make an athletics check to also get out. And I only made it like a 10. I didn't make it a super difficult check. Again, this is to keep things moving. And plus, I didn't want them to, be afraid to get out of the kayak and then they're out of the action for several rounds while the kayak's going through the tunnel and coming back through and all this other stuff. So I wanted to give them a little sense of drama, but also keep things moving and let them participate in the scene. So, the net rules from the knights using the nets. I'll read you the net rules real quick. I had to look them up, and my players looked them up and everything. We just wanted to double check. So a net. This is on page 148 and 149 of the player's handbook. A net is a martial ranged weapon, just like a longbow or a crossbow, heavy crossbow or a blowgun or anything like that. It's not like a simple, like a bow, or there's simple ranged weapons like slings and short bows and light crossbows and all that. But it's considered a martial ranged weapon. So you've got to have proficiency to use it, pretty much. Let's look that up really quick. So weapon proficiency on page 146 of the player's handbook. It says proficiency with a weapon allows you to add your proficiency bonus to the attack roll for any attack you make with that weapon. If you make an attack roll with a weapon with which you lack proficiency, you do not add your proficiency bonus to the attack roll. So most people can use simple weapons with proficiency. But if it's a martial weapon, you need to be proficient in it in order to add your proficiency bonus. So there we go. So it's a ranged weapon, just like a longbow or a heavy crossbow, but it's 515 on range, so it's a very limited ranged weapon. For comparison, a longbow is 150/600. So this is 5/15. So I think normal range is out to 5 feet. Anything after that is long range, and you can't go any past 15 feet. So, and if it hits, a larger, smaller creature hit by a net is restrained until it is freed. So it has the restrained option on it, or effect on it. A net has no effect on creatures that are formless or creatures that are huge or larger. A creature can use its action to make a DC 10 strength check, freeing itself or another creature within its reach on a success. Dealing 5 slashing damage to the net, armor class 10, also frees the creature without harming it, ending the effect and destroying the net. When you use an action, bonus action, or reaction to attack with a net, you can make only one attack regardless of the number of attacks you can normally make. So if you use a net on a turn, you can't make any other attacks regardless of all of your however many other attacks you must normally have. So that's how nets work. And they don't come into play all the time, but in this room they will. So you want to pay attention to it. Also, I want to I had, and by the way, because the owl alerted everybody that this was coming, the first people that came through in their kayaks, well, I was going to rule that just the first people came through just got netted, right? Because it's a total surprise. But or maybe the knights would have rolled with advantage or something like that. But instead, it was a normal attack roll based on AC, because the characters were ready for something because they had heard the wizard shout out ambush craziness, whatever it was she shouted out, Barnaby's in trouble. So they were kind of, hey, something's up, and they didn't get netted. is basically the end result of that. Because if you think about it, getting netted and pulled off to the floor could be nasty. You know, if you're Vanguard, the people up front, you know, who are, I guess, supposed to be your tough people that can take the first hits, are suddenly pulled to the floor and out of the combat. You know, that could be kind of nasty. And if you had more knights with more nets, like the book is written, you know, there'd be more of a chance of that. But I didn't play it that way. Now let me give you a couple other notes and we'll wrap up here. The floating stream as a terrain object. Now again, a lot of this isn't in the book. This is just what I did because the floating stream is such a crazy thing in the um, in the room and affecting the dynamic because it splits the room in half and it's kind of affecting the dynamics of combat. A couple of times I let the bad guys push through it just for dramatic effect. Like there was later where somebody insulted Sir Bluto and he was like, kill that person. And one of the knights just pushed through the water. And that was their whole action. It's like a dash movement, but they were just able to push through it and I didn't make them roll. Um, a couple of times players said, I want to roll under it or I want to crawl under it. It's 2 feet off the floor. I allowed that, but I also made it for that portion. I think the stream's 10 feet wide. That's difficult terrain. If they want to, you know, try to jump over it, it's 5 feet high. Or if they want to go under it or crawl under it or whatever, wiggle under it, I made that portion of their movement difficult terrain, which doubles their movement rate or doubles their movement cost. And in certain circumstances, there was a couple of times it was asked, and I ruled yes, that depending on line of sight and where somebody was, uh, it could provide cover for a ranged weapon, like maybe partial or 1/4 cover or something from a ranged weapon, depending. Because there is 3 feet of water going up to 5 feet between you and your opponent, depending on where you're at and they're at on the other side of this floating stream. So, again, that's not really in the book. That's just something that I did. Um, Sir Bluto again was very tough. He dropped one player like in the first round, just walked over and just hammered them down. He's got this. He gets 3 attacks with a great sword, and I think the knights get 2 attacks with a great sword. And you know they're just nasty. They're high AC. Uh, Sir Bluto also has. It didn't come into play in this fight, but he has boots of leaping and striding, which is a pretty decent magical item. If I hope the players think to loot him. Uh, let's see. You know, I gave out those random magical items before this adventure started because I'm like, you're going into one of the most dangerous dungeons in D&D history at 6th level, 2 levels below the normal, even though there's 7 of you. So I gave them random items. And in this fight, two of them came into play. One is my rogue randomly got a Mace of Terror, and then the bard rolled randomly got a Rod of Rulership. One scares, the other one charms, area of effect. Both of those came into play on here, so it was interesting to see how those random. Actually, if I remember they had those random items, I may have included more knights because it helped them in 2 different circumstances. Sir Bluto did well with because he's got that Indomitable where he can re-roll saving throws twice a day. One of them I just gave to him because I didn't want him frightened. The other one he legitimately resisted the Rod of Rulership. But a couple of the knights got scared, and later a couple of the knights came under the charm effect of the Rod of Rulership, and the bard was like, kneel, and they literally kneeled down and were waiting for his orders during the fight. So that was cool. Darkness got cast at one point by the rogue. He's a drow, so he's got an innate darkness that he can throw, and it throws this big sphere of darkness, and it actually upset the cleric in the party because now the cleric can't see people in that big sphere to heal them, and there were some people that needed healing. But by the book, it does say if you know the source, if you know the point of origin of the darkness spell, you can cover it up with like whatever. And I don't know if they mean particularly an object or whatever, but I said, where's the darkness at? And he cast it on the ground right underneath Sir Bluto. He cast it on the ground. So I said, okay. So a round or two into it, Sir Bluto starts laughing and says, is this the first time that you think I've encountered magic? And suddenly the darkness goes away, and his cloak and his helmet are over the ground, and there's no more darkness radiating. I don't know if I did that exactly right, but I thought it was a cool moment. Ironically, they cast Hold Person on him soon after that. Then he failed his saving throw and his subsequent saving throws, so they basically killed him. And they were mocking like, "Oh, so you've never run into magic users," because he's all held like, "Oh, what's going on here?" So, uh, long story short, Sir Bluto and two of the his knights were killed. Two of the other knights are charmed. Fight's over. That's where we ended. Blackrazor, this fight was taking a. It was like a 2-hour fight. I didn't expect it to last that long. And um, I I wanted to also give a cool, tantalizing moment to Gerald, who the player, his fighter is Uzumaki, sort of Oriental Adventures type of fighter that has Blackrazor, and I wanted to kind of tease him a little bit that there is some coolness with Blackrazor, and the fight's going on a long time, and Blackrazor's like, "Are you going to feed me these souls or not?" And he's like, "I can see that you needed a taste." A demonstration of what you could have if we worked together. And so suddenly Blackrazor became +3/+3 and cast haste on uh, Uzumaki, who suddenly like boom and basically I think dispatched a knight and then turned around and took care of, or no, didn't kill a knight, but did kill Sir Bluto. Blackrazor ate us. It was like exulting on the soul and raw, and so it was a cool dramatic moment, and the player was like whoa, and everyone's like whoa, and basically ate Sir Bluto's soul. Now I did not give uh, the player the temporary hit points from Sir Bluto, but because that's one of the abilities of Blackrazor, but I did temporarily give him that +3/+3, and Blackrazor cast haste on him. And what was funny is like he's trying to kill Sir Bluto because he's like, how do I eat a soul? And he suspected it was if he delivered the killing stroke, and there was some debate at the table about how that worked. Um, and some of the other players were like also attacking Sir Bluto while he was held, and like have myself included, like some players like, really, you're not going to let the player get a chance with Blackrazor? And some of the players were backing off, but a couple other players were trying to kill Sir Bluto. They didn't care, if the player got a chance to deliver the killing blow with Blackrazor, but he did. It worked out that way naturally, and so that was a cool moment. Now, and I made it clear. I said that +3/+3 and the haste, all that went away. That was temporary, just to kind of Blackrazor wanted to give you a taste to kind of motivate you a little bit. And now there's ate that soul. But the thing is, Blackrazor by written, if he doesn't get a soul every 3 days, he'll start turning on his wielder. So this is going to be interesting. So the fight ended at like there's everyone, because of that hold person um, and Blackrazor doing its thing. Bluto went down. We had at least one character drop 0 in one round. Other characters were getting hurt pretty bad by these knights. It was a tough fight. But as of right now, there's two charmed knights they have to figure out what to do with. And they're talking about asking them to join them, but these knights are evil, evil, evil. I mean, if they join them, it'll just be temporary till they can betray them. Plus, they've got the honor of Sir Bluto, their leader, being killed in such an ignominious manner, being held and then struck down. Uh, so, and one other thing that was kind of neat is the bard called Sir Bluto a cow kisser, and that really Sir Bluto was like, oh, and he's like, you know, and he's like, kill him. So assigned one of his knights to kill him because he had to take care of the greater threats and all that. But that was a neat little moment. Also, by the book, Sir Bluto is a known evil, awful criminal that has a $10,000 price on his head. And the player that was playing for just one night had the bounty hunter background. So the bard, because of the bard's knowledge, after a couple of rounds, recognized the heraldry of Sir Bluto. It was like, that's Sir Bluto, the blah blah, the vile criminal, and and the guy with the bounty hunter background was like, would I know that? And I was like, yep. And there's $10,000, 10,000 gold pieces on his head. So that was cool that one of those backgrounds kind of came into it. But that's where things ended. Thanks so much for watching. We will continue. They're basically done with the western portion of White Plume Mountain now. So they have the middle portion and the eastern portion of the dungeon left. And that's pretty much where we're at. And if I were them, they're in a fairly self-contained room. I would probably take a long rest at this point. but they've also got to figure out what to do with these knights, and this player still has to figure out what he wants to do with Blackrazor. So thanks so much for watching. Please leave this video a thumbs up. It helps me out a lot. Maybe leave a comment on YouTube, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. We will catch you next time on Shane Plays. Thanks.